So a pretty common question that people ask is, how do I balance my nutrients? Or sometimes people just want to know how much of a nutrient to take, and it's all kind of the same thing. I'm not trying to give any kind of health or medical advice here. I'm just sharing what I figured out and how I use this information to get my body running properly again. There's kind of a overall understanding that I think we need to paint here. That's what I've been trying to do for a while now, but it's not as easy as I thought it'd be to share what I see in my head. So we're going to run through these. Might look like a lot at first, but it's pretty simple stuff. I'm going to go easy. So I eat nutrients, and they go into my stomach. I need proper stomach acid. That's something we'll get into in another video. You can head right to my homepage, sickoftired.com, and I get into a blurb about stomach acid there and link to more info. This is a really important part that we're going to touch on again. These nutrients are absorbed into our system, and they end up going through a ton of cells that essentially, this is an onion cross-section or skin or whatever, but this just shows how the cells come together to make stuff, which could be an onion or me. So a bunch of different nutrients go into these cells, and they make a bunch of different components. That's the basics of it. These elements down here are the things that our Earth and universe are made of, or what we understand about it. And our system is actually made of these pieces. So these cells here are actually made of some of these things. And then we feed the system even more of it and run those through there to make these things, these crazy whatever pieces that are for our skin or bones or keeping our heart going or whatever it is. The main reason I'm trying to point this out is we have to use these things to rebuild the system, and a lot of people aren't really catching that. We're assuming that we can not get these and play with various different ones to handle specific situations, but that's not how it goes. So I'd like to point out that right about in the 60s, anywhere from the 50s to 70s, depending how we look at it, we started pulling a ton of oil out of the ground and burning it, turning it into plastic and stuff. We also did that with gas and coal. So we have completely changed the environment. Like, we can't deny that. People say, oh, just stuff in moderation, eat like our ancestors. Well, we live in a different world. So something major has changed. We have to look at the situation differently. We used to spend $400 billion a year on healthcare in 1970, and now we spend $3,600 billion, which is $3.6 trillion, which is like almost 10 times as much. We only went from 200 million to 300 million around the same time. So it's not like we have that many more people that we should be spending that much more on healthcare. And our inflation in the 80s was peaked like crazy, and then it went down. And our expenditure per person in the 80s was here, and it just goes up. So it's got nothing to do with inflation. It's almost like it's just happening on purpose. The CDC even admits that 6 out of 10 people have chronic illness. If they're admitting that, it's probably worse than that. Sometimes I wonder if they're kind of using this as an advertisement of how well they're doing at making us sick and turning it into profit. But luckily we have crazy diagrams like this. This looks super complicated at first, but this is just a ton of information being laid out into like a roadmap. If we want to go to Costco or go on a road trip or something, we can look at a map. Well, we don't do that anymore, but back in the day, we used to look at a map and figure out which roads we wanted to take, or, see if we wanted to stop anywhere along the way. When we're not going on that road trip, we don't really care about those roads unless we're bored or something, or for some reason want to research that area. That's the same thing here. If we're researching something and we're trying to figure out why we can't get a certain nutrient to work or whatever it is, we can look at this roadmap and look at the specific area that we're having trouble and figure out how to get past it. So it's pretty common for people to get overwhelmed by this stuff. But if we just, handle it in the same fashion that we might handle other stuff and not just instantly assume that everything's super complicated, it just eventually gets pretty easy. because once I wrapped my head around this stuff, it's really not that complicated. It's just made out to be that way so we don't start messing with it and figure it out on our own. This is a cross section of a liver. I look at this like an apartment complex or a hotel where you can park on one end of the building, take an elevator up to the floor that you're on, and get to the apartment or hotel room. It's not that there's one main elevator in the middle and we have to use that to walk a half a mile to get down to our room. Our liver is doing something similar. It's condensing a bunch of cells together, and then it's got these veins and bile ducts or bile whatever things. This is like, it's got all the nutrients coming in and all the ways to get the waste out in a compact form. And these cells here are what's carrying out all these crazy processes that we need. When we say magnesium has 600 or whatever enzymatic functions, that's mainly happening in our liver. In this crazy diagram, this right here this top wheel is called methylation. This cycle has to run over and over. That happens 50 billion times a second, and 80% of that is in our liver. So 80% of those pathways are in our liver, and they're going through these cells like this. Except in the world that we're living in, we're not getting enough nutrients to handle the toxins that we're trying to pump through these systems to be able to, extract nutrients out of whatever we ate, or we're just breathing toxins and our body has to handle them. And eventually we're clogging this whole system up. And when we have the nutrients that we're trying to, we assume, hey, I got to eat nutrients. Apparently we eat nutrients and there's only these couple cells and there's all the broken ones, so they can't function. What's rather interesting about that is we have this understanding that we can regrow our liver if 90% of it has been removed. So we're thinking if we physically remove 90% of it, the 10% of those cells can regrow themselves. Well, if that's possible, maybe we can figure out how to give our body what it needs to get rid of these broken, damaged, toxic cells, and then we can rebuild them. So whether it was physically removed with a knife or whatever, which is insane, or we actually feed the system what it needs to get the things going to get this stuff out, then maybe we can quote unquote rebuild our liver and heal. And then that would be interesting, because then all the people that are saying they're doing that would be right. So an interesting way to look at this is if we look at our nutrition as one source. So everything we do in a day, our diet, our supplements, whatever, it comes through and goes through this prism and it starts blasting out these different colors or whatever it is. So if we're missing something in our original nutrition source, we have this blackout and it never makes it over here. And instead of that process making it to whatever it needs to do here, we end up with like that process can't get made because whatever's dependent on that doesn't exist. And if we have cells that are clogged up with toxicity, instead of them sending this over, we have more nothing, and we end up not making these pieces that we need, and then we have missing components to what we need to thrive. So, yeah. This is newer information. It's saying that this common pesticide that's used on a ton of food, and for some reason that food keeps being hidden behind weird labeling that's impossible to understand or find or whatever, is wiping out the amino acids by this shikimate or whatever pathway, which includes 3 essential amino acids. So something that we're growing our food with, a lot of our food, or is making its way into a ton of food products, whether we realize it or not, is potentially wiping out 3 important essential amino acids, and we're not absorbing them. So that means we've got this going on, where our source of nutrition is missing something that we need to keep ourselves together, and that's not going to work out so good. So I think a common issue that people run into is forgetting that these systems all work together. And that's partially due to when we go to a doctor's like, oh, your thyroid numbers are incorrect. Here's some thyroid medication. And then at that point, most people assume, oh, my thyroid's messed up, because otherwise they would have done other stuff. But what if somebody's stomach acid isn't correct, which is pretty common, and most people know that their stomach acid isn't correct? If our stomach acid is low, which is common, we don't digest our protein and our B12, and we have symptoms of protein and B12 deficiencies. And we also don't release bile because our stomach acid is already low. So if we release bile, it would lower it even more. And then we would have this super alkaline substance trying to make its way through our gut, which doesn't work because alkaline can burn just like acid can once it gets strong enough. Our gut needs that stuff to be in the right form, and we're not digesting it, getting the fat out of it and stuff. When this happens, we absorb oxalates, load that into a bunch of tissue. Tissue can't function properly when it's got rocks in it. So we're like ignoring the whole overall picture, and we're focusing on these little pieces, these individual gears, and we're trying to spin them, except they're bound to the rest of the system, and we're like, why isn't this working? Until we address those other situations, which could be stomach acid, could be infection, could be major magnesium deficiency system-wide or something. Until we figure out how to get whatever the roadblock is out of the way, it could be huge toxicity, mercury, or some kind of weird substance that we somehow came across growing up or whatever it is. Until we get that roadblock out of the way, these gears aren't going to start spinning together. So we can't just focus on mitochondria and wonder why we have to like megadose or whatever to try to push it into gear. It might be stuck like that on purpose, and it most likely is. Our body is very smart. It's not going to do these things for no reason. And we're sitting here trying to force it with these random nutrients. So I think an important aspect to see or understand, utilize, whatever, is this pulse dosing method. This helps me see how much of each different nutrient my body wants or needs or doesn't need or whatever. A good way to look at this is if we were trying to heat a log cabin with firewood, we didn't really understand how. We might, once we finally get the fire going, because it's so cold in there at that point, we might put a ton of logs in there and end up skyrocketing the heat in the room so much that we can't even open the windows to let it cool off. And then we might figure out like, oh, we only need to put a couple logs in there every few hours or something, and that ends up still getting warm. Because the reason firewood's a good example is because we might put the wood in there and we don't feel the heat until that wood really starts burning. Just like if we take a nutrient, we might not really feel it until our body finally does whatever it is to start utilizing that nutrient, or it just has time and energy to finally do it. And then a good way to heat a room or take a nutrient is to find this comfort zone and do that by starting slow and seeing if it gets close to whatever we need, and then adding a little bit more and figuring out how much time to put in between and stuff. And once I started doing this with nutrients, I realized like, okay, so I want to get a good bit of selenium to make sure I'm getting it, but then I don't want to take a ton of it. So I take 200 mcg of selenium like once a week, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending how I feel. Sometimes I wake up in this like crazy brain frog. I take like 1,000 mcg of selenium that day to feel better. I've even done it with more than that. But then I don't keep stacking up on it, and I don't have to worry about my body not being able to use it. I don't take magnesium every single day, but if I feel symptoms of magnesium that I've learned over time, I take more of it. I see a lot of people buying certain nutrients that are, whether they're for the iodine protocol or they're just nutrients that their naturopath told them to get or whatever, they just start taking whatever the bottle says. And then they ask in the forum like, hey, I'm taking this and I feel these signs of taking too much. What do I do? And it's like, well, nobody can really tell you to take a different amount than the bottle or what your doctor said. But we can share something like this pulse dosing method where when I get a new nutrient, if I can, I open it and sprinkle it in water and take sips of it, and I see how I feel. And sometimes I'll do that and be like, wow, I feel like clarity and stuff. And although it's great to feel that stuff, I still go slow because whatever I'm doing to feel clarity is going to end up having processes that need to be cleaned up. And this is all good to do. We just got to go slow because the other process might depend on something that we still don't have. So in a perfect world, we would be taking our nutrients in, running them through all of our cells and doing whatever conversions they do and send to each other. And finally, we would be fueling ourselves the ability to sleep, digest, run, be peaceful, converse. These are just generic ideas. I'm just trying to show that as our cells are working together, they can make the energy it takes to do more advanced stuff, where once these cells start getting loaded up with toxins, like I was kind of pointing out, once we get enough toxicity in here and these things start becoming overwhelmed, then we might not be able to do some of the more advanced stuff because these cells are physically inundated with something that is inhibiting their ability to function. So we get, we're looking for magnesium or selenium or B6 or whatever, but the cells that are depending on those processes are never asking for that nutrient. There's nowhere for that nutrient to go or process. It's just like if a factory was inundated with some type of toxicity because we were buying inferior product from a different country or something, or it was loaded with some toxic pest or whatever it is that could be explained in the same fashion, we have to get that factory going again, or else we don't have the ability to do that function anymore. So we can't just buy the resources that the factory that's broken needs and assume that the resources are going to get used. So over time, this is kind of what it looks like. This up here might be glutathione, and this here might be our CBS gene that uses B6 to convert homocysteine to bring it down to whatever happens in glutathione. This could be our ability to use SAMe, or we have it's locked up because it's not getting enough nutrients to balance our SAM versus SAH. There's just so many things that could be going on in these cells. And until we get enough nutrients to start rebuilding these and bringing this back online a bit so it can start getting to the next one, and we do that, we're just stuck with this roadblock. So a lot of people are realizing this, and they're using mainly iodine. There's other nutrients can cause stuff like this too, but not in the way iodine can. And there's a reason iodine's doing it, because our body needs that to run a lot of important processes that can handle this. Otherwise, our body doesn't have what it needs, and it's not going to just make things happen that, like we talked about, we just don't have the processes or the nutrients for. So an issue we run into is a lot of people want to get stuff done quickly, which I understand. When we feel like crap and we finally find something that's supposed to help, or we're just interested in thriving and living a long time, we find something and want to just get through it and power through it and get it done. If we take enough iodine, which can be, it depends on our system. Sometimes a small amount can do this, sometimes a large amount can do this. Mainly this happens if we take just way too much and cause so much apoptosis that it all happens like this at once. When all of these are being dropped at the same time, whatever is happening, and if you read the forums, it's happened to me, all of this stuff is going into, it drops into our blood, but it's going back into our liver and kidneys, and it's going through our heart and everything. That's why we feel all this, because it's all of the cells are feeling it. They're trying to get through whatever onslaught this is. And now we have these few cells left, and we're trying to run these toxins through them. Except nothing's really changed. All we did was apoptosis a ton of cells, and we might have ate a magnesium or two by now. We're just overwhelming the system. This is why people are getting stuck. And then eventually running to high-dose iodine, which is wrapping this stuff into ideolipids and holding it in fat, which just means it's out of the way temporarily, but we still aren't fixing this stuff with nutrients, or else we wouldn't have this problem. So if we do get a bunch of nutrients, we can kind of keep up with what's going on. And if we go slow, we don't have to worry about this crazy onslaught. And that just makes a lot more sense with what we're trying to do. So here's how I handle this. I drop a little bit of the toxicity into my system with a little bit of iodine. And as my body is trying to reabsorb these, I'm also trying to get nutrients that I know my body is using through that whole pulse dosing thing. But I'm feeling the impact of these toxins in the cells. As these toxins are trying to go through a cell, that cell is inhibited and it's not doing what it's designed to do or whatever it is, so we feel that symptom. if we read that symptom, we can find other people that say either a study says this nutrient is connected to that, or people say that it helped, whatever it might be. And that goes back to just the fact that we can adjust the input into the system. It doesn't really matter exactly what's happening, if the nutrient is a cofactor of a cell or if it's actually clinging with a toxin in some way, shape, or form. In the end, people are saying that it helped with this or that, and we don't really know exactly what's happening sometimes. So it's not really important to dig into those crazy details. It's just, I feel this. Is this going to help? Yes, that helped me. No, it didn't. If it didn't help, maybe there's this other nutrient that is down here first, and until we get this cell happy, we can't get the other cell happy and process everything the right way. But that's where going slow is handy, because instead of just wrapping everything in fat, we can actually feel what our body's trying to process, learn what we're full of. Even if we do a bunch of testing, we can still learn more about what our body's trying to tell us, or we can at least just tune in and go, hey, this nutrient is elevated again, and I feel this way again. So now I know that, or I can at least assume that when I feel this way, that this nutrient is elevated. And now I can remember to go look for X, Y, and Z nutrient to try to help combat that or help process whatever the backlog is. And really what we're trying to do is get these cells back to running in this like harmony almost. When they are finally making all of the right things and we can get these pieces back online and feel ourselves again, we're creating this harmony of energy that is who we are, our maybe not our soul or whatever, but it's us. Something I think that's important to point out is these right here might be the detox pathway cells that we need to restore and get functioning. These cells might need to be apoptosis before they can be rebuilt, which means they technically don't exist right now. So some people are saying, how do I support my detox pathway? You might need to rebuild it first. And rebuilding it might take time, and it might take nutrients that aren't necessarily connected to what we're going after. We might have to, hunt backwards and look for other nutrients that are connected to symptoms, nutrients in general, or whatever it might be. That's where it gets a little confusing because, and even makes us need to slow down on what we're doing if we want to do it comfortably, is that these pathways they're not able to function right now, and we need to slowly rebuild them with the nutrients that we're barely able to absorb right now. And that's going to take time before the system's able to function. There's something else going on, though. There's this aura that we're creating that makes us. The CIA has information about some weird energy crap that we make, which is interesting that we don't talk about that. And the CIA just wanted to, for some reason, figure out if that was happening or not. I think it was the CIA. It might have been another alphabet. When we're making this energy properly, we're working collectively together as like a global consciousness. This is most likely why the world sucks right now, because we're not eating the right things. We're not making our cells to make us the right way, and collectively that's why we're garbage. And, it's not to blame us individually. There's people that are in much worse shape than us that don't even realize they're ill. When people are angry and break stuff and steal and do horrible things, that's not them. That's this system being inhibited by toxicity, which is most likely on purpose if you really start digging into it. So this is what the U.S. looks like. Instead of these energetic things having these strong force fields around them and working together, we've got these radiation towers that are, overpowering the little bit of energy that we have. We've got toxic crap coming in from China. We've got toxic crap coming in from the TV. It's just an onslaught of negativity in so many ways. And that's why the world looks like it's like on the verge of teetering. And this is the solution to that, as lame as it might seem. And this is part of the whole thing that we just went over. If we don't change the way that we're looking at the Earth, nothing's gonna change. We're part of the planet. Remember the periodic table and how the cells are actually made of that? That means that this dirt that is turning into carrots, and then we eat is making us, and we are the earth. So if we're not doing that fundamental step properly, and we're growing carrots for profit instead of, because we want to be nutritious and be part of the earth that we're part of, it's not going to work. It can't happen. It's not like these people are going to be like, oh, you want nutritious stuff? Yeah, let me make sure to focus on that. And there's a couple people that will. It's going to cost so much that it's not going to work out. So that doesn't work either. But all I'm trying to say is we need to make a lifestyle change. And that includes like learning about the potential engine degreaser that's being used in our shampoo as a cheap way of cutting grease or oil. It's about everything. Realizing that the fragrance thing plugged into the wall is spitting out stuff that's linked to horrible stuff, and some people react to it and they don't realize that that's what they're reacting to. It makes them sick and stuff. So we have house guests that come over, and it's like we assume they didn't like dinner or something, but it might be because we just dosed them with some kind of chemical that their biochemistry isn't able to process, so it makes them ill because now they've essentially been poisoned, because that's what poison is. Something that our body can't get out, and the poison ruins the system because it's just not able to be processed. So, ta-da! Yeah, so thanks for joining. I enjoy talking about this stuff, but it's not easy, which, that brings up the point. If you want to kind of help with that somehow, you're interested in making this information go further, of course, sharing is great. Go ahead and let me know in the comments what it is that you didn't understand or liked or would do different, or whatever your favorite color is. And if you want to chip in a couple bucks, so maybe one day I can do this stuff a little bit less monotone, head over to Unpilled TV, where I have other videos, and I have my Patreon link there. You can go ahead and give me a couple bucks a month. That's like, a cup of coffee one time a month for me. You can't do that? Well, anywho, it was good to see you. I'll see you later.